The Sony A1 Mark II and the 28-70 f2G Master are an amazing combo to capture photos with, but is 50 megapixels too much? And do you actually need an aperture of f2? So in this photo, I'm gonna dive into some of the photos that I was able to capture with this lens and camera combo, because unfortunately I do have to send this back. So I'll show you some of the photos that I've shot over the last 2 weeks. And if we take a quick look at my Lightroom gallery, you can see it's a combination of portraits, which I think a lot of photographers who are interested in this lens will be looking at. They're going to be wanting to shoot at those super low f2 apertures to isolate your subject from the background. But we also have some landscapes shot at f2 and some at other apertures, and some city shots. So we'll jump right in. Some of these photos, disclaimer, were shot by Stefano, where he actually had the camera at the same time I did. So we were both shooting on an identical setup, the A1 II with the 28-70. So this is at f2. Now, in some cases, when I'm shooting landscapes, I want to see a little bit more of the background. So with this unedited photo, you know, it's probably a little bit more cropped than I'd want it to be. I'm missing the top of the mountain. You can see, obviously, it nailed focus. This is not a camera that I would at all be worried about missing focus. With the AI detection and the autofocus mode, top of my hair, probably gonna be a little bit out of focus because we are shooting at a little bit of a tighter 51 focal length. You can see that these edit up very well. I think in this case, I may have used one of my presets. There's windswept, white cedar. Thunderbird is always one that looks nice, but an aperture of f2 reacts differently in different scenarios. With that last one, you could kind of still see some of the texture on the mountain. With this one, the mountain is completely gone. So that is probably a little bit too low. You can see here, Stefano opened it up to 3.5 or closed it down. Probably a little bit underexposed here, but when you're dealing with a lot of highlights, a lot of white, snowy textures, you don't want to blow those out. One of my favorite couple of photos that we captured was at this point, just outside of Lake Louise. You can see how nicely these photos edit up. In this case, I did actually use one of my presets. I believe I used my South Shore preset right there. I did tweak the blues a little bit just to bring them down because it tends to be a little bit more of a tropical preset. You can see that's what it looked like. Again, we're underexposing because we don't want to blow out those highlights. Look at, I got some snot freezing on my mustache there. The depth of field looks pretty much exactly where I would want it to be. So in a case like this, and with that last photo, you saw that f2 was probably a little bit too shallow. So don't be afraid if you're shooting portraits, if you're shooting a subject and you want to make sure that more of it is in focus. Let's go back to the edited version here. You can see I'm getting some nice texture, some of that Cordura fabric, and we've got that kind of shoulder to shoulder here, which is why a photo like this just looks so nice, because we're not blurring out our subject, but we're still far away enough from our background at a 28mm focal length that everything just renders really nicely. And if you saw the short that I did at this photo spot with the landscape shots that I shot in the Hasselblad, you would know that we had this mist. So you can actually kind of see it in the background floating through the mountains. The lighting from the sun was also being misted by a little bit of clouds. And that's why the shadows on my face aren't super harsh. They're kind of just like perfect. Like this type of lighting, if I could have it 24/7 all the time, I absolutely would. Stefano also shot some burst photos of me with like, what does this camera shoot? Like 30 frames per second or something crazy like that, where I was skating. Obviously, I'm not an NHL player, so I don't skate the most gracefully. As I was skating around, didn't really miss any of these. I think I have like 200 of these photos that were in a burst. But later in the day, we went to the top of the gondola at Banff, and this is a great lookout point if you ever go to Banff. Highly recommend. There's a little bit of a fee to go up the gondola, but once you do, go up for sunset, because that's what we did. And I think if I set the time on the camera right, no, it is not. It was not 12:19. Just go to the unedited photo here. So if I reset it back to 0, that's what the exposure was. I'm looking at my histogram, probably want it to live around there, or I probably could also just hit auto in this case. The thing with auto is that it tends to expand everything a little bit too much. But to give you another example of, you know, maybe we underexposed too much and just how much you can get back, With a camera like this, one thing you'll notice is that we actually shot this photo at f4. So one of the things that Stefano and I did while we were out in Banff was we would shoot a lot at f2 and then a lot at like f4 and maybe like f5.6, because you have this amazing mountain range in the background. And of course, with depth of field and with hyperfocal distance measurements, that's pretty much always going to be out of focus unless you're focus stacking or shooting at a really high aperture. That's not what we want. In this case, a little bit of bokeh, a little bit of out of focus in the background is nice because it helps create that depth and separate those layers. I didn't really take too many detail shots with this lens, but this is one of the ones that I did capture just to kind of see how the fall off and how the sharpness, what that's all like. So right now we're zoomed in at 200% inside of Lightroom. You know, the details that we're capturing are awesome. They're what you'd expect from a 50 megapixel sensor and a lens with this price tag and this level of image quality. And then another view just past sunset, this is where you can look down Banff Avenue and all the lights start to turn on. So this again is unedited. You could play with it to maybe make it a little bit less blue, 1/8 of a second. So not super long, but f2, ISO 400. So there really shouldn't be any noise in this at all. Obviously, there's always gonna be a little bit of noise in the darker areas. This is really cool. Whether you have like a 45, 50, 60 megapixel sensor, this is the type of stuff that makes a difference compared to having like a 24 megapixel sensor. You can see like all the streets and the cars and the people. Again, we're zoomed into 200%. Very cool that from a photo like this, we can zoom in and like probably make an awesome full-size print. Now, here's the edited version of that. And I think if I had to guess, is this my windswept preset? Thunderbird. I may have edited this one from scratch, but you can kind of see with these darker photos, a lot of those, the color grading from the shadows starts to pop out. Like Rustic Dawn doesn't really have too much of a heavy shadow adjustment, whereas, you know, Windswept has a lot of greens in the highlight that start to get pulled out. That's the edit that I went for, kind of like this green or this blue orange split. I think it looks really well, and I still need to post that one on Instagram. So that one's getting posted for sure. So some of the photos that you've seen, I've already posted over on Instagram, but some of the others I'm gonna be editing into Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts to share with you. But in order to create videos and shorts and YouTube videos like these, you kind of have to add extra layers of music and sound effects, which I get from the sponsor of today's video, Artlist. And you've heard me talk about Artlist before. It's great if you're looking to add all those extra bits and pieces. Like for this video, I kind of wanted it to have that chill, hanging out with a friend, sharing some photos, and talking about cameras together. So I went onto Artlist, filtered by their lo-fi lounge type music, and I found exactly what I needed. But if you're someone who likes to keep everything inside of your editing software, inside of Premiere Pro, inside of Final Cut, you can now do that because Artlist has added an extension. So in my case, I go into Premiere Pro, open up the Artlist extension, and all of the resources that you're used to seeing on their website, you can now get right inside of your editing software. And you never have to feel like you're missing out because Artlist is always adding new things. Last year, they added AI voiceover and their LUT features. This year, they're gonna be doing a little bit more with like AI generation and video, but it's not out yet, so kind of keep your eye out for that. But one of the coolest things that's happened is I've been sitting down watching a television show and then a commercial comes on, and I'll recognize the song from the commercial as an Artlist song. Because Artlist isn't just for me or for you, it's also trusted by a lot of big name brands. So if you're ready to dive in and get the best deal on Artlist, or just check out what they're up to, you can do that using my link down in the description, which will also get you 2 months free off of an annual plan. So big thanks to Artlist for continuing to be a supporter of this channel and everything that I do. Now back to some photos. The next morning, we woke up and my friend Matt Littlewood took us to this spot. I believe this is Bow Lake. Bow Lake and Peyto Lake are right beside each other. So again, we're not shooting at f2. In a case like this, a lot of kit lenses do shoot at f3.5. And then without a subject, this is what it looks like. So you can see me thinking that the sun's gonna come up and it's gonna be super bright. I intentionally underexposed this photo. So that's what it was sitting at. I probably could have gone a little bit brighter. If I go to my presets, was it Atlantic Highlands? Atlantic Highlands 2, that's what that one looks like. But also zooming in really quick, I don't usually add too much sharpness, like any sharpness adjustments to my photo. In this case, I did, and I think it worked really well. I actually applied it in a mask to this area here. And if I zoom in to 300%, you might be able to see a little bit of it. Let me see if I can turn the masks off. Yeah, so you can see there's probably a little bit of clarity, a little bit of sharpness. Super fun photos when you get the edge of the sun just peeking through and hitting the peaks of the mountains. You have the sun on the right half and the moon on the left half, and I think this composition just looks awesome. Maybe the only thing I'd like is, some guy on a dog sled. Maybe that guy could be my friend Matt here. Matt posed up, was wearing this really nice yellow jacket. So that is the before. Again, f4.5, because I want to capture more of the background. Although, even at f4.5, it is a little bit blurred out. But that's the thing, when you are creating your compositions, you need to think about how the texture of your subject conflicts with the texture of the background. And so in some cases, if the background has a lot of texture and your subject has a lot of texture, like in this case, maybe like Matt's hat has a lot of texture, but then the background also has texture. I don't want those two things competing. So shooting at a lower aperture of, in this case, 4.5 works, but probably could have gone a little bit lower. I think this balances out really well. But those are the things you need to think about. Not only just depth separation, but how the depth separation affects your perception of the textures and the colors and the lighting that is hitting your foreground versus hitting your background. Again, just some quick landscape shots. These aren't even edited. So this is an example where the textures don't conflict, because if I had done this and just raised the shadows all the way, now all of a sudden you can see the textures on the tree and they start to be the same frequency, the same level of detail as the textures on the rock. So in this case, I don't even really need to edit this photo. Like maybe I could apply a quick preset just to get it looking in like the colors, the color grading style that I want. But really, I would take that photo, post it straight to Instagram without any editing. Got to capture some landscapes with a human subject in it. I like this one, but it's almost a little bit too contrasty. We had lost some of that maybe like nicer light at this point. This one I love because we have really awesome side lighting. Again, I'm not shooting it at f2. I've chosen to shoot it at f3.5. A lot of the time, the sharpest point for a lens is like, 1 or 2 clicks up from the lowest aperture. In this case, we had Matt walking through the scene. So we've got him there, not quite in focus because I probably chose a focus point that was around the middle of this frame, but we have side lighting hitting this mountain and just looking awesome. This one's already posted on Instagram, so you can go check it out. And then we shot a little bit later in the day as we were going up the Ice Fields Parkway. This was not really an intended photo spot, but we just kind of stopped, popped out the lens. Didn't need to shoot it at f2 because this is one of those things where, you would really like to see a little bit more of the texture of the mountain. The nice thing is I have Stefano nice and sharp and in focus, almost to the edge of his shoulder. It's probably focused right around there. Ear to nose at f4.5 and 28 millimeters. I used my Atlantic Highlands preset in this case. There's f4, there is f2. You can see what the edge of the mountain is doing, and you can come into Lightroom and say, select the sky. And I always do find that Lightroom kind of has a little bit of a challenge. Sometimes you can get some banding at the edges. Obviously, this is very extreme, but there you have that haloing, that banding. Versus if you had a little bit more of a sharper background, like you do in an image like this, sometimes Lightroom actually performs better because the edge of that mountain is easier for Lightroom to find. And of course, you always need a few candid, unplanned photos. This is one of those photos that Stefano snapped of me. The tricky thing with a photo like this is the lake is known for all of the bubbles. And when you're shooting at even f4.5, you can see that the bubbles aren't quite in focus. I did another version of this photo on, I believe it was the Canon, where I focus stacked, and I did a series of 3 photos, one for the foreground, one for the background, one for the subject, and kind of like one in between. And that way you can actually get kind of all that texture, all that detail in focus. In this case, f4.5. I'm not complaining about this. I think this is perfectly fine. A photo like this looks great. I might just, maybe composite it with another shot where I could get more bubbles in focus. This is a great example of how lighting can make a huge impact on your photo. This version of the photo looks kind of okay. F4, whatever, it's probably a little bit dark, probably could bring it up, but literally 30 seconds later, the sun came out, and look at this. Now all of a sudden it's hitting the bridge perfectly and creating that separation, which adds extra depth and extra interest into our photo. So now what? I'm still at f4, but really it doesn't require too much editing. And if I zoom in to the final product, you can see the bridge looks great. The detail on the mountain looks great. Everything in this photo, the lighting, the composition just lines up so well. Where an f2 lens makes a lot of sense is if you are someone who's really into prime lenses. In this case, this was shot at f2 and is a perfect example of when I would use a shallow depth of field to isolate a subject. So I focused on the logo, all the detail on the handle, the main thing I wanted to capture. Of course, I could also have focused maybe on like the GFX 50 logo over here, but then we have that really nice fall off. You can see all the dust around Kofi's camera here, the Kofi camera. I believe, yeah, that is my Thunderbird preset. Urban Heat kind of gives it a little bit more of a vintage warm aesthetic. Same deal with these photos. These look absolutely awesome. Same sort of f2 setting, isolating that subject, or in this case, I actually did shoot some wildlife with this lens. And the thing that we want to see with wildlife is, of course, feather detail. Can we see the texture? Yes, we can. We can see that feather texture. It looks really cool. And luckily I was fortunate enough to get really close and capture these swans without spooking them. Another good test of this lens is this image, which I've captured on multiple cameras. So it's a good test to see how the fall off of the highlights occurs in areas around the CN Tower. So if we bring that back, I clipped it. I can tell you for certain this photo is clipped. I'll go to the unedited version. Usually with sunsets, you don't have to do too much. Maybe just bring back a little bit of color in the sky. This is the challenge, right? So when you start to make those adjustments, you get that banding. You get that hard edge where the depth of field causes the fall off around the edges of objects. But considering I shot this at ISO 800, I did apply some masks. So you can kind of see, there's without masks. There's some masks. Obviously, there's going to be some noise texture in the skin and in some of those shadow areas. I think my favorite photo that I shot is actually this photo of the Hasselblad at f2. Because if you own multiple cameras, the thing that you got to do is shoot photos of your other cameras. In this case, I believe I focused on the Hasselblad logo at f2, ISO 800. And yeah, of course, you can see a little bit of noise in this area. That's not unexpected for a sensor like this, but you can see I underexposed it, right? Because I want to make sure I'm not blowing out any of the details that are in this area. So when I do edit it up, all of that color information is going to be available to me. Another final one that we'll talk about is this set of photos. The nice thing, of course, with the A1, the Sony Alpha 1 II, is the fact that the image stabilization is great. So these photos, 1/10. If I zoom in, you can see, of course, it's probably a combination of Taha moving as he's standing there, because humans are just naturally shaky. There is a little bit of shake to them. I don't want to say it's the camera. In this case, I do probably want to just say it's the human subject. Same deal when he took a photo of me. I am just a little bit blurry. 1/10 again. Probably because I was moving, probably a combination of, there is a limit to the resolving power of a sensor plus the image stabilization and all that sort of fun stuff. This one, I think I used my Frozen Rye preset because it tends to have a little bit of blue in the highlight. Gives it that downtown Toronto subway type of vibe that I was going for. So that is all of the photos. You see that some of them we shot at f2, some of them we shot at f4, at f5.6. I don't think we did any super high aperture, like to get any starburst effects or anything like that. But overall, really impressed with the quality of the images that you can get out of a camera like this. I know this video was a little bit of a longer one, a little bit different than maybe what you would see when I talk about camera specs or I'm out in the field, but I think it's important to actually go through and see what it is that you capture with the camera. So it's not just in studio, boring, whatever shots. We're actually getting out, shooting with this thing during the 2 weeks that Stefano and myself and my friends were able to kind of, you know, I hand them the camera, they take a photo of me, I take a photo of them, and everyone has a new profile photo for Instagram. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. There will be another video after this where I actually talk about Canon and Sony and my thoughts on the Sony system, so stay tuned for that. And until the meantime, grab your camera, get out, and go shoot photos.